Okay,
Letting
perfect.
you do that.
Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us on this webinar. So today is the third in our series of virtual roundtables focusing on different topics related to wellbeing in the workplace. Today I'm delighted to welcome Heather Kelly to the table to talk about mental health at work. Hi Heather, it's really great to have you here.
Hi Angela, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. Heather's highly experienced in workplace mental health, and she's held key roles at the charity Mind for several years, as well as This Can Happen, which is the UK's largest ever workplace mental health conference. We're delighted also to collaborate with Heather as lead mental health consultant at Super Wellness, supporting our clients to develop a sound strategy around mental health with nutrition as an integral part. So today I'll be looking to run the interview for around 30 minutes. So I'll be interviewing Heather for approximately 20 minutes. So if you don't mind muting yourselves during that time, that would be great. And then we'll open up for questions in the final 10 minutes. So Heather, my first question, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your professional journey so far and what really brought you to specialise in workplace mental health?
Sure. So I started my career as a photographer. Might be a bit of a surprise. But for a number of reasons, I decided to pursue a career in the corporate world. I worked in insurance for 10 years. I was a high-risk property underwriter and broker. At this stage in my life, I was very ambitious and driven. And I was very fortunate to enjoy a lot of success, but to be honest, it was at a cost. I eventually found myself burning out after many years of long hours in quite a high pressure environment. And unfortunately, during the same period, my mom passed away after a very short battle with cancer, which was obviously quite a shock. And for the first time in my life, I had a sense of my own mortality. And I really looked at the rest of my life and assessed what I was doing with my life at that stage and thought about also my mom, who had been a therapist and had really dedicated her professional life to helping other people. So I guess with her as an inspiration, I decided to pursue a master's in sustainability and responsible business practice and considered a career change to more meaningful work. And eventually at the end of the master's, I did decide to make a career change. And I left the insurance sector and was working in the social enterprise space for a period and really loved that. The idea of business for good, social business is something I still feel very strongly about. And so that work led me actually to my work at Mind. I felt really passionate about charities and the profile that they have and their opportunity actually to have business products they're selling where the revenues are then reinvested into the charitable work. So at Mind, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to develop a social business. It was the Workplace Wellbeing Index. So I led the development and operation of the index for 3 years before leaving to become an independent consultant. But I think, the index was a fantastic opportunity to really dive into this space. It's the only benchmark in the UK of best policy and practice in workplace mental health. And so, I think it's given me a lot of fantastic experience that's helped me in my independent work with employers.
Fantastic. And you've been in this space of mental health now for 5 years. So you could say it's really the period of time where things have evolved massively. What's your take on things? How would you say the agenda's evolved over that time?
Well, gosh, it's changed so much. Angela, you could probably concur because you've worked in this space, I think, even longer than I have. I would say, 5 years ago when I was at Mind and we would go meet with an employer, the topic of mental health really was still quite taboo. And it was really difficult to encourage employers to invest money into mental health training programs, into trying to run campaigns across the organization. Employers just didn't see the return on the investment at that time. And I think that this is one of the most important things that's happened in the past 5 years, is that we've had a lot of pioneering companies who actually had the foresight long ago to see that people are their biggest asset, and if we invest in our people, we will reap the rewards. So I think there are some fantastic examples of some pioneering companies like Royal Mail, the Environment Agency, Unilever, Eon, some larger ones that people probably have heard the names of, that have really helped because they've been very public and they've been able to say, we have seen a return on investment. So I think that's really helped momentum. And I think people like the royal family, obviously, and the Heads Together campaign that they have launched has helped immensely. I think to broaden the conversation outside of the workplaces, but it's I think it's given a lot of notoriety to the mental health agenda.
So would you say we're reaching a tipping point? Do you think it's about to go mainstream, or it has gone mainstream?
Well, that's a big question. I think what I would say is I'm hopeful that that's where we're headed. And it feels right now like something fantastic is happening, at least in the UK. I wouldn't say that this is in every other European country, or I come from America, for example, and I'd say they're much further behind than the UK. But in the UK, we're really leading when it comes to workplace mental health. And I think a good comparison would be corporate social responsibility. If we think 20 years back to 1999, who knew anything about corporate social responsibility? Maybe people were calling it something else, or there was a small percentage of people who are starting to build some momentum around the topic. But now, and I mean, certainly any publicly traded company must have a corporate social responsibility agenda. And look how quickly that's happened, that it's become mainstream, and it's absolutely required. So that's what I hope we're on the way to with health, that it becomes a KPI, that it becomes, particularly for publicly traded companies, I think it's even more important. But this is something that employers must report on, and I strongly believe that should also entails the employees' feedback. So the employees feeding back about the impact that the mental health agendas that the employer has put in place have actually helped them. I hope we're heading in that direction. It would be fantastic.
I think, well, CSR is a really helpful parallel, I think, to see how it's gone from being a nice to have to being a must have. And hopefully the same is happening, for mental health. So for companies at the moment who are looking to support a mentally well workforce, what are some of the biggest challenges, would you say, they're dealing with?
I think it's a difficult thing to generalize. What I would say is that, if we were to speak generally, stigma is something that every company is going to be facing a challenge with, and normalizing the topic of mental health is actually one of the hardest things to achieve, but every company is going to be at that starting block. Something that I could recommend to an employer who's starting the journey is signing the Time to Change pledge. Time to Change is a campaign run through Rethink and Mind, two charities, and it's essentially an employer saying to its staff and publicly, we are committed to supporting the mental health of staff. We have pledged to do this. And then there's support that comes along with that. And that's all about breaking stigma. So that's just an example. But I think the other thing that I would say is that it's not something, solutions are not cookie cutter for mental health in workplaces. You can't compare an SME to a large corporation when it comes to mental health. They're going to be looking at very, well, maybe some similarities, but most of the time, very different challenges. So you have an SME who may or may not have an HR lead. They might have someone else who's taking on the people responsibility alongside other responsibilities, let alone very much budget to invest into a mental health strategy. Whereas you have a large organization who does have maybe even a well-being team and a budget, but they're looking at supporting a massive workforce and people potentially in different working environments. You might have some desk-based workers, some not. So that's a massive challenge. So I think what's most overlooked oftentimes is employers being able to learn from one another. And there are great case studies out there where you can try to learn from employers like yourself, for example, looking at the Mind Index, and they have gold, silver, and bronze ranked employers, and you can look them up, see what they've done if they're in your sector. But I think the other thing that can be overlooked is learning from organizations that actually have a similar business structure to yours, completely different sector.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, I always found it really interesting when I'd be in a law firm, and then a week later I'd be in a professional services firm like one of the big four, and they would have very similar challenges that their clients facing, billable hours, oftentimes people having to travel for work, but very high pressure environment, long hours also, because you're having to deliver work and turn work around quite quickly. In the advertising industry as well, I'd say relates to these three. So these are three industries that normally would probably never really have much reason to speak to each other unless they're supporting them. But this is where I think that it's really helpful for employers to also network, and especially in London, there's loads of events where employers are invited to come and meet other people that are supporting this agenda. They can learn from one another. I think that the final challenge I'd want to mention is not seeing this as a box-ticking exercise. I think that there's unfortunately a tendency for this to happen, and not just with mental health, but other agendas, because businesses are so busy, they have so many things.
Other priorities.
Priorities, absolutely, for staff. So Mental Health Awareness Week, this week, for example, is a week when many employers run campaigns and activities, and then maybe they do something again on World Mental Health Day in October, but oftentimes it's quiet in between, or maybe there's not something for a year. And I think what's most important is that actually employers see this as something that they're doing on a long-term basis and really embedding it into the culture.
Yeah. So thinking long-term, what other advice would you have then for organizations looking to put in place a strategy?
Yeah, I think that long-term, as you just said, is the only way that companies are really going to see sustainable impact when it comes to workplace mental health, because you're looking at culture change and you're looking at behavior change. Culture on the business side, behavior change when it comes to staff. In some cases, it depends on the situation, but these are extremely difficult things to achieve, so they don't happen overnight. And I think it's really important that an organization has a sound strategy in place, and that they think about what objectives that they want to reach on both a short-term and a longer-term perspective. And they build a strategy that looks at activities and initiatives that are occurring throughout the year to achieve that. And eventually, over time, they will achieve change, and they will see the return on investment.
So it takes a lot of patience. So my final question, and you won't be surprised coming from me, is what your take is on nutrition's role within that mental health strategy.
Well, no, thank you for asking that. And as you know, Angela, because we're working together, nutrition is something that I feel very passionate about. And I've been very interested in the connection between mental health and nutrition for quite some time, for both personal reasons and I think just more from a scientific perspective. So I'm a little bit of a geek. I follow research in this space, and there has been research released recently which has found that the gut microbiome, which, I mean, we do know that we hold emotions there. I think a lot of people know that, but they've discovered that there are actually specific gut bacteria that if you don't have those bacteria, you're significantly more prone to having a mental health condition. So I think, and you know more about this than me, but what we eat is actually impact our gut microbiome completely, and medications we take and impact as well. So I think that if the education piece is there in workplaces and people know more about this, they can impact not only energy levels, but potentially see it as a preventative measure for mental health. But I think, Angela, you probably know some
well, I'd have
practical examples than I do.
Yeah, I mean, we've come across a lot of different angles. I suppose, some of our sessions and programs focus on mental health. We actually get asked a lot to do food for the mind sessions, and I think one of the things we notice is that people engage with it as perhaps a different angle. We might not be comfortable perhaps talking about their emotions or quite broaching the subject in a more direct way. I think nutrition can give them a slightly different way to address issues, or like you were saying, it's a preventative approach. So it really addresses everyone, and you don't necessarily have to have an issue at the time for it to be helpful. It could just help to prevent. But certainly I think the education, I mean, there's so many different areas of nutrition that affect how we feel, and one of the simplest is really just sugar. I mean, being in the workplace, it's so tempting to have that 11 o'clock snack, or perhaps it's a way of rewarding the team to offer cake. There's talk about cake culture in organisations. So certainly I think the education to understand the impact that can have on how we feel, on our blood sugars and how we feel, and what we can replace it with. Certainly employers could really help a lot with that. And hydration, I mean, that's another area that's really quite easy to address, but when you think of employees who are desk bound, say call center employees, and it's actually quite hard for them to get up and fill up their glass of water. It could just be simply offering all employees a water bottle, that they can, a nice water bottle that they can use at their desk. So yes, plenty of areas, I think, but then I would say that. So I think this brings to a conclusion the question part that I had, but I just want to really open up and see if any of our attendees have some questions for Heather.
I've got one question. So if you have a business that already has a mental health strategy, how could you improve it by or enhance it by adding nutrition? How would you go about doing that?
That's a really good question. And Angela, please chime in, give ideas here. But I think some of these employers that I mentioned earlier who are seen as the pioneers or the leaders and workplace mental health. I think that they're always going to be looking for the next thing because they've seen how significant the impact is to support this agenda to support the well-being overall of staff. So if you're looking at overall, because of course mental health comes under well-being, so we have to look at the physical and the mental side of well-being. I think this is one of the easiest things you can do to fill out the mental health piece. So through education, again, so bringing in some support perhaps from an organization who are experts like Super Wellness. There's that opportunity for some training. You could also run challenges for staff, to try to get them motivated. And I mean,
competition always works quite well, doesn't it?
Sorry, what did you say?
Competition always works quite well.
Yeah, but I think it's just that next level. And Angela, do you see that with employers sometimes who are already like, we've got it on the mental health piece, but we want to, we're really ambitious, and we understand. We're reading the research. What can you do to help us? We want to go further to support people.
Yeah, and it is really about that preventative approach. And yes, we've addressed the most pressing issues. We've got mental health first aid in place. That's the right place to start. But now, how do we reach a wider audience and help everyone wherever they are in their journey, really? And I think education is a big aspect, but also I think it's also part of the culture. That there's a culture of perhaps eating lunch at people's desks. Questioning, is that the case in the organisation? Could more be done to encourage people to leave their desks, perhaps socialise at lunchtime? There's a lot of benefits of food and bringing people together, and that in itself has a benefit for mental health as well. So I think when you look at various, we run surveys asking employees, if they eat lunch at their desk, and usually the percentage is really high, and that really strikes me as an area which would be a good place to start, really, for a lot of organisations.
Makes sense. Any
other questions?
Yes, Angela. What I was thinking about for Heather was, you mentioned that you're talking about the small and medium-sized enterprises, and that they maybe don't have a lot of resources. So a company like that, who's maybe starting from the beginning, what advice would you have for them to, what areas would they look at for a mental health wellbeing strategy?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions about mental health strategy is that it's going to cost a lot of money, and the truth is that there are a lot of agendas or initiatives that don't have a high price tag attached. So for an employer looking to start the journey who doesn't have a lot of employers need to build a business case within the organization so that they can have something tangible to try to justify the spending to the senior leadership. So I think that like two examples that I have. So signing the Time to Change pledge costs nothing because it's a funded campaign. So I mentioned Time to Change earlier, and any size organization can do that. It comes with free support for a year from the Time to Change employer team, which is really helpful for an employer at the beginning stages. And the other thing that an employer can do is start a mental health employee champions network. And this also, maybe you designate a small budget to them so that they can run some activities. But the point is that it's something staff-led, and you find staff, and it should be voluntary. But I can guarantee you're always going to find staff who are interested in the subject, because one in four of us experience a mental health problem ourselves, and this is higher for us having someone that we care about experiencing mental health problems. So yeah, I think allowing staff to be part of the solution is really important, because it's only led from the top, from HR or from senior leadership. People they're not going to feel as comfortable sharing, being open and honest. But if you have a peer support network and peers who are leading well-being activities around mental health, or somebody you can go and talk to, it's really, really successful. So those are two things that are proven really to have that don't have a large attached.
Great. And thinking at the other end of the spectrum, you mentioned the pioneering companies, the companies that are very mature and have achieved a lot. What do they look like? What have they got in place that other companies would aspire to have, over the next few years?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm thinking of Thames Water is one that I am always very happy to share about, because I know their chief health and safety officer, and I've never seen senior leaders so personally passionate about getting this right for staff. I think they have 10 or 15,000 employees across the UK, and they in 5 years' time have managed, and they've taken staff surveys. They've really changed the culture. So one thing that they've done that I think is really groundbreaking is using virtual reality technology to train staff. I mean, not only from a health and safety perspective, which is also very useful, but for mental health, so that people can actually build empathy and walk in the shoes of a potential colleague or person they care about who's experiencing a mental health problem. And it's been extremely impactful. They've been oversubscribed. Imagine training and training at an organization. There's a waiting list.
Wow.
That says something. And I think that in combination with, they see it, it's at boardroom level, and they have KPIs, and they're reporting publicly on their mental health strategy on a regular basis. So, I mean, that's one example. But of course, that's a little bit more costly. But of course, depending on the organization, you might have more budget to commit. The Environment Agency is another fantastic organization, a public agency, who have limited budget, of course, but have managed to. They were #1 in the Workplace Wellbeing Index, Mind Index, for 2 years in a row. And one of the things that they've had an employee network. Mental health network, as I mentioned earlier, that's massive. It's grown over the years, and it's really, really effective. So that's a case study I would suggest people could have a look at. Mm-hmm. They've really gotten it right. They've broken the stigma. People are open and honest about their mental health, and they actually say work helps them. Work has helped them to get better. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also really important that, if we're looking at who are these successful pioneering companies, that what's also taken into account is if the staff have fed into the, organizational surveys, or, if they're in something like the Mind Index or, Britain's Healthiest Workplace, for example. But I think that it's really important that you're getting staff feedback about the impact it's having for the staff. And it's not just coming from, a self-assessed sort of situation where an employer is doing all this, but, how does it feel? So I think that's really important.
Great, that's great. Thanks, Heather.
Well, we're coming up to time, so I have a question that might be more personal. Heather, what would you say inspires you to do the work you do then?
Well, I mean, I talked about my mom a bit earlier, so that certainly inspired me. But I'd say more so that I feel very fortunate. I mean, I'm an immigrant to the UK. I'm from America, but I feel very fortunate to have been working in the UK at this time and being so passionate about mental health. People that are very close to me have experienced mental health problems and really difficult. And so I'd like to really see social change happen successfully in the UK, because the UK can then become a pilot for other countries to see, look, if this is really working. I mean, and if it can happen in the business space, then I think that will motivate government too. So I think if I'm playing a small part in that, the work that I'm doing to have an impact, that that inspires me to go to work every day. And yeah, there's something really special happening in the UK right now when it comes to mental health. Like,
it feels like it.
See how it continues to grow this time next year. Who knows?
Yeah, definitely feels like the right time. Well, it's been very inspiring to hear you, Heather. So thanks very much for joining us and answering these questions. Thanks to everyone else who joined us as well. Hope you found it helpful. And if you have any questions or you would like to discuss further how Heather might be able to help you in your organisation, feel free to email us on info@superwellness.co.uk, and we hope to see you again soon on the next webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.